think our mics are on. It is 10:02 a.m. and we have a quorum, so I would like to call our meeting to order of the California Workforce Pathways Joint Advisory Committee and thank everyone for joining us today. Today's meeting is being broadcast, so all interested parties can view the broadcast by visiting http://cde-ca.videossc.com. And for those that didn't get that, the link can also be found on our committee webpage. And I think our first item on our agenda is approval of the meeting minutes from our May 29th, 2019 meeting. So has everyone had a chance to review those meeting minutes? And if so, is there someone who'd like to offer up a motion to accept?
I'll move to approve.
Thank you very much. The motion to approve by Member Rawlings. Is there a second? Thank you very much, Member Salazar. There has been a motion and a second. Are there any committee members that would like to make comments on the meeting minutes from May 29th? Any additions, corrections, substitutions, deletions? Any comments from members of the public regarding our meeting minutes? All right, then I believe CDE staff will take our vote for us.
Yes, Chair Robin.
Aye.
Member Rollins.
Aye.
Member
All right. The motion to approve the meeting minutes from May 29th, 2019 have been approved. All of our meeting minutes and recordings of our broadcasts are available on the California Workforce Pathways Joint Advisory Committee webpage, along with today's agenda. So if you need more information or if you'd like the link to be able to watch this webcast live, you can find it out on our webpage. Today's agenda includes an update on the California state initiatives, including the California Career Technical Education Incentive Grant and the kindergarten through 12th grade Strong Workforce Program. It will also include an update on the development of the California State Plan for Career Technical Education. But before we get to reviewing the meeting documents that are in front of the members, I would like to welcome to the state of California, directly from Iowa, Pradeep I'm going to mess this one up. I've been practicing. Kotam Raju, our Division Director of Career and College Transition Division. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and I look forward to working with all of you.
We are so happy to have you here. All right, so if I might ask Lisa Reimers from the California Department of Education to review the materials in front of us, we'd appreciate an overview of the amazing portfolio that is before us now.
Yes, good morning. So in your package, you'll see we have our agenda and our minutes that you all just approved. The yellow is the updated copy of the principles that you approved at the last meeting. And then if you go to the other side, all the green items are for the first item where we will go over the state initiatives. And your blue items are related to the Career Technical Education State Plan.
Thank you so much. And these items are also available on the table out in the lobby for those in attendance.
Yes,
in our
and they're
audience
also
here.
available online.
Very good.
With our agenda.
Thank you so much. All right, are we ready to get started on our agenda items? Our first item is the California Career Technical Education initiatives, which include an update on the Career Technical Education Incentive Grant, which we affectionately call CTEIG, and the K-12 Strong Workforce Program metrics. I would like to welcome both Michelle McIntosh from the California Department of Education and Matt Roberts from the California Community College's Chancellor's Office, who are here to provide us with information regarding an update on the committee of the committees that deal. I'm going a tad bit too fast. Yeah, who will update our committee on the Career Technical Education Incentive Grant and the Kindergarten through Grade 12 Strong Workforce Program, including the metrics. So I am looking forward to what you have for us today, Michelle and Matt. Good morning.
There it goes. Okay. There we go. All right. Good morning. So first, I just want to kind of walk you through a little bit, give you kind of a roadmap for where our presentation is going to go this morning. The first thing is that Matt and I have sat down together with our programs as they are sister programs, and we've spent some time trying to do some common planning together. So we're going to walk you through a little bit of that. We'll talk about CTEIG. We'll talk about the outcomes and the metrics that we're showing for CTEIG. We'll go into the K-12 strong workforce, and then we'll come back to the metric conversation, okay? So first of all, for common planning, one of the things that we had looked at is looking at both how CTEIG and the K-12 strong workforce really come together and how they work together. And in doing that, we took some time to sit down and look at how we want to roll out the programs for the next fiscal year. We have a couple things that specifically what I want to do on the CTEIG side, and that is trying to get the dollars out. Number one, we want to get them out quickly, but we want to try to get them out so that things line up on the fiscal year. However, in doing that, we want to be very cautious as we move forward, and we want to make sure that we're doing that in a way that we can do it well and make sure that we're doing it in a way that doesn't overburden the field. So in doing that, the first thing you're going to see is, so for the fiscal year 1920 CTEIG application, originally we were going to release that in August. That is a change. We are now going to move that to September so that will come out at a time when all schools are back in session. Everybody will get the information ahead of time. We'll do some marketing or, doing some callings and also do some webinars up front to help people so that way we get more of a broader reach for the program. So that application will be released in September. From then we will take that application. It'll be due in November, okay? And then we will actually follow that up with a January board meeting. The important thing for the field is that they need to know those numbers sometimes prior to March 15th, and knowing what their allocations are prior to March 15th, because sometimes the CTEIG funds that they're using sometimes are helping with the salaries of teachers. So that's important, why we want to get those dollars out and get them out in a timely manner. So we'll do the September release. It'll be due in November. And then in November, that's when we'll also have the K-12 strong workforce that will roll out. So that application will come out in November. So the thing there was to have them not have to work on two applications at one time, but to kind of stair step with each other. So that way it wasn't overburdensome on the field to do that. So it'll come out in November. The application will be due in December. And then I think your results will be January as well.
We'll have the selection committee sit down again and score the applications and then fund the application. So the dollars will roll out prior to March. Yep.
Okay. And so then after that, then the next round of CTEIG, and that's going to be for fiscal year 2021. We would look to release that in January, and then that way we'd be able to hit the May board meeting. That would then put CTEIG on a fiscal year for folks. So that's been one of the biggest complaints that we've heard in the field, is that things don't line up on fiscal years. It's very difficult, especially the previous years. We've had some different matches. The match right now is 2-to-1, so that's consistent at this point. But for previous years, it's been difficult. Plus, we've had extensions of deadlines, et cetera. So the point of getting on the fiscal year is to help our schools be able to know what their allocations are prior to going into that actual year and be awarded the funds ready to start using at the beginning of the fiscal year. Okay. Any questions on the timing?
I think it's wonderful to try to align for their fiscal year and to also make sure that we get the information about allocations out to them before that March 15th.
Important to us, too, to align with the LCAP planning period, which was the Joint Advisory had recommended before. So we want to make sure that we're maintaining that we're following up with the metrics discussions, et cetera, so that we're able to help with that accountability in the field. So,
Member Rucker.
I do want to say I appreciate that you've made these changes on the schedule, because this was a concern that had been raised by myself and my colleagues from the State Board, that this did need to align with the other planning cycle that is happening in the field. I will say I am a little concerned, particularly as it relates to some of the metrics that districts will be tasked to consider as part of what they have to develop in their submission. With the CTEIG application being due in November, the 2019 release of the dashboard happens to coincide with in November. So I'm kind of hoping the application deadline is in late November, not November 1st. And then as it relates to the application for the fiscal year 2021 CTEIG, can you tell me when the deadline, the application would be released in 2021 January? Are you saying that the deadline would be in March for the submission of the application?
Only in March, so that we could then make the May board meeting for the allocations.
Okay.
Yes, we want to give the schools enough time to be able to write their applications for whether they're writing, if they're a reapplicant applying again, or for new folks that haven't had the chance to apply before, and be able to have the opportunity to provide them with some assistance in writing their plans if need be.
Yes, my concern has been this year that the application timeline tended to favor LEAs that were reapplicants, and new applicants were going to have a more difficult time getting the work done. So I do appreciate the way the timeline is working, and I do understand that it does put a greater burden on your side of the process to manage this in a timely way. So I do appreciate that, and I really am pleased that I believe the field will be happier with this timeline as well. It'll be more helpful in ways that they really can't articulate at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Then what about 2021 for the strong workforce?
In terms of aligning, yeah, we'll continue to align. We have yet to kind of talk about the latest development in their timeline, so we just need to react to it and sort of get in the same room if that's. So we're kind of building this as we go, but I think the desire, just as it has been with strong workforce program in the colleges, is to align with the fiscal year, especially when it comes to planning and the release of data, because, yeah, if you don't have the data at the right time, then it's not. So, yeah, point well made. So we'll keep reporting this out to you. Yep. I'm getting in trouble today, aren't I?
It's a Friday.
Hello? Yes, it is. Happy Friday. Thank you.
Happy Friday.
All right, good. Good morning. Did that answer your question? Good, thank you.
Okay. Along with some common planning, both Matt and I have talked about really some common objectives for both us and our agencies to work on as we continue to move through with administering these sister programs. And the first thing is really to reduce the administrative burden on our local field, and one that's trying to make sure that and we're not asking them to write 2 applications at one time. Even looking at the information that we collect together and seeing if how in the future that could possibly maybe parlay into maybe one application with two different parts, but would serve both purposes. So more of course to discuss about that, but again, first priority is really to reduce the administrative burden for our folks in the field. The second is to continue to message how CTEIG and the K-12 strong workforce complement each other, so that people do see these as sister programs and learn how to work with these programs in unison and in concert together, so that they're not programs that detract from one another, but can really work to provide good career technical education and pathways for students. The third is to improve and incentivize collaboration. That's been a big part. We've seen a lot of districts pull together, in some of the smaller districts, part of the consortia, and so we want to encourage that, and so that is our third priority. And then continuing on, we've noticed just as we started to have, just even in the metrics conversation, but even just with some of our own definitions, it's really trying to create a shared terminology and definitions between the two agencies and the two systems, at least for these two programs. So when we're talking about something, we know what we mean. You know, one of the things we've talked about is, you know, they've made a move to career education at the chancellor's office, and in K-12 we're still at that CTE. It's career technical education, and so it's helping folks to understand, you know, that those are the same, and where there are differences, helping them to understand that as well. And then also to develop strategies to improve the high quality CTE, CCI, and programs of study, and then really developing model pathways that.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
Oop, did I do that? Go.
Okay.
Tell them what CCI is.
So the CCI.
Yeah, college and career indicator.
The college and career indicator.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
there was.
I just wanted to make sure the community college folks knew what CCI meant.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yes,
that's
the
right.
college career indicator.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry.
Thank
I
you.
threw off.
No, this is why
Yeah.
we're tag teaming.
Yep. Go.
So, and then developing the model pathways that cross segments and lead to improved student outcomes that close the achievement gap. So these are our objectives that we're going to continue to kind of look at and utilize as we move forward with these programs to be able to offer the programs in a consistent way, but also in a meaningful way for the field. I should ask any questions on these.
Are there any questions or concerns? I just want to commend the collaboration that's taking place. Not only is it in support of the Chancellor's Office Vision for Success, but ultimately it benefits all of us, creating those clear pathways, but making the first priority reducing administrative burdens is huge.
Huge.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So now I'll go into the update on the CTE Education Incentive Grant. So for 18-19, the grant award notifications were sent out to LEAs, and actually we're receiving the signed grant award notifications back, and as the signed grant award notifications are coming back to us, the dollars are going out to the field. And then the next part is I wanted to share with you is the first set of metrics that we have from CTEIG, and this is the first set of metrics that we have, and I want to be clear that these metrics come really from the first CTEIG. When I say the first CTEIG, I mean this is the 17-18 year, so it was in that first $900 million phase. Okay, so these metrics, you guys should have gotten a copy that looks like this, and I know I presented to you on the first snapshot during the last meeting, but now we actually have the back, and this is our follow-up data. So I wanted to share the follow-up data that we were able to receive from our grantees. Again, the information was due on the 30th of July, and then we had a holiday, and schools are still working on, we're working on closing up, but we have 77% responses already. We're still waiting to get those dollars, are still waiting to get more responses in, but wanted to at least give you a first snapshot, a picture of where we currently are. So these are this is a representation of 77% of the total CTE respondents. Of that 77%, 95% of the CTEIG students completed the survey and were identified in successful placements. So when you look at that 77%, of that, the 95% and where they're placed right now is we have 70% of those students that continued their education, 26% of those students gained employment, 3% of those students entered the military, and 1% of those students entered into the state apprenticeship program. Also, the interesting thing is, even though we have 77%, only 77% returned, it's a good response rate so far, but of that, we were able to actually contact at least 53% of the students. So that was a pretty good response rate for those eligible students. You'll see again on the left-hand side that 84% of those 12th grade students completed a capstone course in their CTE pathway, which actually designated them prepared on the CCI dashboard. So that was interesting to see. And then on the right-hand side, we provided some additional information to show where the CTEIG expenditures have gone. So you'll see about 47% in equipment and supplies, 16% in facilities, and then about 37% in staffing. We also gave you some additional expenditures at the bottom. These were additional areas where folks spent money, including consultants, CTE counselors, career technical student organizations, curriculum, and then service contracts. So this is your first full shot of the metrics from the CTEIG program. Again, this represents the 17-18 year from that first round of CTEIG. Okay.
Michelle, were there
Yes.
any of these items on the data collection that stood out to you or anyone who was looking at this as extraordinary, not anticipated?
I think right now, just in looking at it just overall, on the front page, I would say just the number of students, CTE students, that are being affected by these funds. I mean, if you look at our total, CT enrollments in the state, and then you see that more than half of them are being affected by these funds, that's huge. The other was, the certification pieces, I think, because I know that's something that we're looking at to add and possibly into the CCI at least is, those certification numbers and how do you get those and how do you collect those and what do you do? So that was interesting to see. But then also just looking at, the number of students that we were able to contact, because generally, survey, you're lucky if you get 10 to 15%. So the fact that we were able to get a hold of at least 50% of these students was pretty amazing.
So we'll start with Member Alma.
Michelle, just out of curiosity,
Sure.
particularly on the students who gained employment, do we have any additional data underneath that in terms of whether or not they gained employment in their field of study, and more importantly, if it led to living wage jobs?
We don't. So again, this was the first, this is based off of a survey that was sent out through our technical assistance centers that we had. And so trying to follow just the letter of the law, what it asked for. But that is something I know typically, like when the ROPs, when we used to collect that data, that was something that we always collected. So that could be something that we could possibly look at for the future.
Okay. And also maybe just some data sharing between the California Workforce Development Board and wage-based data with EDD to see if there's something there.
Part of what will happen too is the data that Michelle is presenting today will roll up to the community colleges, and we're really sort of looking at those outcomes that you mentioned in terms of employment and wage gain, that type of thing. So we'll look at that a lot closer. Let me get to the mic here. Sorry. We'll look at that a lot closer. So we'll talk a little bit more about how the handoff of the data is going to take place. Keep in mind this is 17-18 data. We're just now sitting down and aligning the definitions, which, by the way, would probably be the one area that we would ever come back to you and say we would recommend changes in the second year on the metrics, based on do the definitions sort of align. Because I think it's important for us to make sure that we have that database built that's based on effective. So it's back to our initial points of trying to get those definitions aligned. So I think more to come. In K-12 Strong Workforce and the RFA that went out this year, we were asking for data coming from LEAs to begin in November of 2020, knowing full well that we wanted to measure sort of the effect of the dollars in play. And so there's a catch-up that needs to happen with the dollars going out right now in the next couple of months going into next year. We want to make sure that we're measuring and looking at those things. So there's a few steps that we're taking to sort of make sure that the data goes up the pipeline. It's building of the launch board tool, which I know our community college folks are familiar with, and also Kristen as well. So I wanted to make sure that we were sort of painting that picture for you as well. So we will be able to get there. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Just some clarification on the data. So the student surveys that came back was 17, 18 graduates?
17, 18 graduates.
Yes. Okay. So, but you just now collected, which means that they were a year after graduation.
Yes.
That's pretty darn good to get 53%.
Yeah.
And then,
Thank you.
yeah.
I'll thank my technical assistants
Yeah.
because they were like, we need the data, get us the data. So yes.
Is this collected through the agencies or through the schools and LEAs, or was this collected through direct to the?
So we did it was a survey that we did that was sent to each of the individual grantees.
Oh, the grantees then.
The grantees
sent out
reported
their
on.
Graduates.
Mhm.
Got it. Okay. And then was the survey sent back to you directly, or was it sent to the?
It was sent to our technical assistance centers, who then reported into San Bernardino County Office of Education. We had a separate data contract with them, visualization. So I'd like to give them a kudos for making the data, getting the data, and presenting it in a way that looks nice. So
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
And then, are we expecting for Strong Workforce to have a look at the expenditures as well, kind of, so that we can see if there's any alignment in the?
Yeah, absolutely. It's part of the commonality, and I think we're taking the page from your vision on it, right, in terms of, asking the question, where is Perkins coming in? Where is CTEIG coming in? How are the two playing? Because we know full well that it doesn't necessarily canvas the entire system, but so we want to make sure, if anything, we want to sort of incentivize this year going forward. What we want to in the applications is collaboration. And how do we better measure that? And how do we sort of paint that picture? Those are the questions that we're getting over on the ledge side, as well as how are we sort of, anyway, does that help?
yes.
Hi, I have a question similar to Alma's, but on the continued their education. Are
Yes.
we asking if they're selecting majors that their high school pathway kind of guided them toward?
We did not ask that, so that could be something to be thought of for the future. Yes. Just know that they went on to.
There are two metrics that are called out for in the future. One is, are you enrolled in the pathway, your course of study that you took in high school? And number two, did you register and enroll with a community college within a semester of leaving high school? So there's a consistency or a throughput measure that we're after with that. So that'll come out on the other side of the pipeline. Yep. Good question.
Member Rucker.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you very much for putting together this report and giving us this information in this snapshot. One of the things that jumps out to me, Chair Grande, was the 84% of the students who completed
Yes.
the capstone course,
For the CCI.
and how that also added to data that was reflected in our CCI. I'm not sure that was called out to us when we looked at the dashboard in 2018 or 2019 when we saw that data being added. I'm not really sure we saw that kind of improvement, or that we saw this particular element as what moved any needle for any of the LEAs on the dashboard. I think this is absolutely amazing information to know. I'm also curious, with the information that you're getting from the survey and the questions that you're being asked here, we actually have some high expectations about the kind of information that the survey can bring back to us. in asking for this information that we've asked you about, some of it does seem to be going beyond what the statute requires you to get information on. But at the same time, we're still continuing to have a conversation about maturing our student data system. Between the kind of data system that the K-12 system currently has in CalPads and the types of more granular data that different community college districts are already collecting, what's being reported also in the survey also suggests some types of data fields that can be added to or should be considered for developing or maturing particularly the K-12 data system, not only to make it easier, but also to give us the more sophisticated and more granular type of information that could be used to answer the questions you're hearing from the dais. So my question also for you is, in preparing the survey, was there any consideration about how you would capture or collect data that could inform any conversation about the data system with other departments in this building?
Yes. So one of the things that as we discussed putting the survey together, we tried to go as much by the law as we could. And then, yes, we did ask some other things, but I was very cognizant of, okay, we don't want to overreach of what we're doing, but yet we do need to get some of this information, or some of the information would be helpful for us. And so in the conversations, there are things like, the graduation rate. Well, that's something we should be able to pull from CalPads. The problem that we have with pulling that information from CalPads is that it doesn't disaggregate it by program. It won't disaggregate it by funding source. So what you'll get is you'll get the graduation rate for maybe all CTE students, but you won't get the graduation rate for CTE students that were affected or were part of the CTEIG dollars.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
That's important.
Yeah. And so in looking at, and so we are having future conversations and have started, I wouldn't say future, we've already started to have the conversation with CalPads and our data folks about, what's the data that we really can get from CalPads, and then what's the data that we might be able to get through other sources. So that gets into a little bit more of the metrics conversation that I was saving for later. But I'll tell you that one of the things is we're really looking and researching the sources of the data the sources of the data for the metrics, and to look at those to see where's the most reliable source that we can get that information. Because if we don't have to burden the field by asking them one or two more questions and it's already available to us, then we should be pulling it that way. But again, it's working, I think, with our CalPads folks and our data teams here to say, are there some flags that we can do, or is there something that we can do so that we would be able to pull this information in the future by funding source or by data source. We have the same thing with Perkins, right? So we have this separate Perkins data system that pulled all of our information, and so those conversations are continuing.
Well, and thank you for sharing that, Michelle. I
Yes.
Don't mean to put you on the spot
No.
by asking the question. I would rather know
Yes.
what we can and cannot do. And if you don't mind, I'm going to put a pin in this conversation. That's something I'll continue monitoring and asking
Thank you.
about in future meetings, because I'm hoping that will help direct our work and direct the recommendations that we can make. And I'm certain at some point in time it may either require some action from the board, or in particular as it relates to making changes to the data system, I'm quite certain
Yes.
it's going to require legislative action. That's something beyond our scope. But if we ask the questions and we
Right.
know what it is we need to ask for, that might be helpful in those other conversations.
Yes. Thank you, Member Rucker.
We'll come back over to this side. Member Salazar?
Yes.
And I'm curious too, Michelle, does that then account for, and I'm curious, disaggregated data by demographic group? Is
It-
because
I believe
honestly,
we
I
could
would
do
say
that
that's the
if it
single
was
biggest.
in CalPads,
Got
but
it.
we didn't do that in this particular survey.
Because I got to say that's probably the single biggest omission in the survey results. Is it would be wonderful to know if there's if there's the ability to disaggregate data by demographics, so we know that as these resources are being doled out, they're impacting the students.
Yes.
The most.
No, I agree. And that would be if I could wave a magic wand and make CalPads do everything.
So just to clarify, it wasn't for lack of intent. It was more of the CalPad's inability to be able to disaggregate data by demographic. Is that accurate?
It's that CalPads doesn't collect the data as we need it. So it's that there's specifics that would have to be built into CalPads to be able to collect the data. And then again, some way that we would have to flag or determine, which sources, right? Because you would want to know the information, particularly as it relates to CT incentive grant. But when we pull from CalPads overall, it pulls all of CTE data. So there's not a way that, at least there's not a way that I'm aware of right now to where it can disaggregate it by different types of programs.
All of a sudden, I'm going back to that first objective, reduce administrative burden, and boy, wouldn't that be nice if CalPads could do that. Matt?
I was going to say, I appreciate Member Rucker's comments, because it is something that if we want reliability of data
Yes.
and the ability to sort of cut and slice, because at the community colleges, we're well aware of the issues of trying to call out CTE-based, expenditures and results and outcomes. And I think that we know that the key to that are the data definitions and making sure that we do augment CalPads. So to the extent to which the advisory can assist us with that. That's a message, I think, that follows along suit with the integration sort of vision that's out there as well. So we're here alongside. We're here to share data sets, the underpinning ones. We want to make sure that we're providing the outcomes that you're looking for, and then also the public, too. So.
Member Rollins.
Thank you. Just to build on a point I think you alluded to here, when we start taking a look at the cradle-to-career data system, right, when we take a look at the really deeply longitudinal data system, are we part of that conversation in a deep way through both agencies? And if we're not, we should be, especially as we recognize the need to be able to kind of slice out these different funding sources, as well as by all of the different myriad of disaggregated identifier information about our population, so we can really see where we're being impactful. I really want to make sure that that's built into it, in addition to trying to modify our current systems to get us this data sooner.
Sure.
Yes, absolutely, on both, yeah. We need to be part of that conversation. And it's interesting, the workforce investment boards have been a big proponent of data lakes. CSUs have been a big proponent of data lakes. So I think that we're all talking the same language. It's getting to that policy objective and saying, is this an important piece for us? And then, two, how do we protect students? I think that that's an important, and I know David Rattray previously had brought that up in terms of the ethics that we have with our data. So anyway, those are all considerations, I think. Thank you.
Are there additional questions regarding the snapshot that Michelle has provided? Then may I ask one question on the facilities? The 16% of the CTEIG expenditures went to facilities, a quarter of that to new construction. Do we know if that new construction was related to any new programs that were being implemented, or were they only new constructions on programs that were already in existence?
That I don't know. So that is a very good question. And I could check with San Bernardino to see if there was any way when that data came in, if it was disaggregated or if they did get more information than that. But yeah, that is a good question. So I can follow up on that.
Any other questions regarding the snapshot? Can I thank you again, Michelle, for providing this? This is amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank
Michelle.
you.
Just want to take a couple of minutes and give you an update on K-12 Strong Workforce. I know we did a pretty in-depth one last meeting. There were a couple of follow-up questions that came up, so I wanted to provide you some follow-up data there. One of the questions was of the applications in K-12 Strong Workforce that met the cut score, how many were funded and how many weren't. And so this gives you an idea of, by region, how many met the cut score, the number that are funded of those, and you can see it aligns fairly well. Once you get down to Inland Empire and Los Angeles, deviates a little bit, and in some of the other ones slightly. But you can see the percentages fairly close. Many are in the 90s or 100 percentiles. I think Member Costa's question really was after, are we underfunding this program? Is it something that there's a greater need for? And when she looked at this data, I know I briefed her on it before the meeting because she had asked, and her response was that it doesn't appear that it's necessarily underfunded. It looks like we're getting funding out to most of the applicants that met the cut score. So I think that that's a piece that I wanted to share with you as we continue to drill down into the data. Again, following up with Michelle's presentation, we are continuing to align our data to build the pipeline that will then house or bring up the K-12 data, and then we'll align to the community college data. We do have previous data through CalPass Plus, which is a voluntary data system that LEAs and districts can contribute their data to. It's mostly to show sort of attendance in post-secondary schools, but we also sort of are able to sort of mine it. So when that data tool becomes available, as our data comes in and as we're picking up the data from CDE, we'll be able to show some historical pieces that might not necessarily show the effect of dollars so that you can see. So I'm happy that we have that data available for us to sort of make it. But I just wanted to make sure that you understood the timeline as we moved it forward in making sure that the two programs are connected. So,
Are there any questions? Member Rucker.
Dave, thank you for Dr. Roberts, thank you very much
Rucker,
for
absolutely.
for preparing this information on the funding profile from the Strong Workforce Program. I know you might not have this information off the top of your head, so I'm going to just ask you, when you come to make an additional presentation for the new funding stream, the new funding cycle, could you also add a column to identify new recipients or new programs that were added or being funded for the first time? I think that would be interesting information to find out. And I'd also be interested in knowing particularly about smaller programs, because again, as we know, RFPs and these competitive applications tend to fund larger districts more often over smaller districts. So I'd really like to know particularly about smaller or rural districts. And then in looking at the grants that were funded, in the notes that you made or the strategy that you used in making the funding decision, it says funded selectively or that there was a decrease in the amount of funds awarded. What was it? I'm not sure how to ask this question. In looking at the grants that were funded, particularly in the Inland Empire and in Los Angeles, what was not funded? That's probably not the correct way to ask the question.
Yeah,
but what was better way to ask questions in making the funding determinations?
Right.
What actually was prioritized
right.
In making the funding determination for those LEAs?
Absolutely. Well, beyond the cut scores, which is the basic, rubric that we use to score, we use multiple scorers for that. Then there is a call out in the legislation to consider things like the regional economic priorities. In other words, the ones that rise to the surface as a result of, job needs, supply and demand, that type of thing. So it's really paying attention to that and moving it forward. So, yep.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I appreciate the questions. I want to make sure, I know I missed you at the previous meeting. Would you like it if I presented the information to you that I presented last time, which is, it may answer some of the questions that you have here, so perhaps we could talk offline or And I can show you that information.
Oh, I have that information.
Okay, good.
Patricia DeCoste made sure I received all of that stuff. Yeah. So thank you for the offer. I probably would like to get on your calendar and talk a little bit more away from the meeting. So since you made that public offer, I'm going to take you.
Absolutely.
I'm
on a roll today, folks. So
yeah, and I have witnesses. I'm
all
definitely going to
good.
take you up on that. Besides, our offices are not that far away. So yeah, I can.
As long as there's no more questions, I'm okay with it.
Yes.
Okay, good. Let me get a negotiation in there. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. We're excited about this, and I think one of the ways that we can look, if it's not baked in the metrics, we are using a system called NOVA to track expenditures. It's not beyond us to, and we've talked about this, how do we throw in questions that might reveal some more particularity? So keep asking the questions that you are. There are mechanisms that we can use to do like spot data and survey data to sort of pull it forward. So just keep talking to us, though.
Can you remind me the number of overlap between the strong workforce of organizations that applied to both programs? Do you remember?
84%.
84%. Okay, across for both of them.
In the first year, yes.
Okay, so did you look at the 15% to see which ones or any characteristics of the 15% that did not apply?
You know, it's really about rigor of application. Let me give you an example. Even of the ones that were funded, when we looked at metrics and just being able to identify what you're after, half of the applications really were very clear, and it showed us that there was, you know, a dialogue taking place and that it was on spot. In some applications, we weren't sure what they were targeting. Now, those are sort of leverage points for future funding as well. So it's important for us to make sure that that we're, I guess, wrapping around the system to make sure that we're pushing forward the accountability as the state wants to see it, and then making sure that we're able to collect that data and then show it. So I think that's the road that we're on. Yep.
Okay, so if 84%, 85%
yep.
Overlap like that, and I'm assuming that on the grant applications you have a budget page, are you able to take a look at those and see? Because I'm just really curious. We've split up the money, right? And so I'm really curious if they're how they're utilizing the two different grants, and if it's different, or are they just funding the same kinds of things?
That's a really good question. For instance, when we're looking at collaboration and incentivizing it, it moves away a little bit away from the existing structures that might be maybe post-CCPT, and that there's a need to continue to sort of fund those structures, rather than maybe going in and saying, how can I think innovatively
right.
about this and shift it, right, and strategically shift it. So I think these are the types of questions that we can definitely drill down. The budgets that we ask for in the work plans, even if they were part of a consortium, we ask for the drill down of the budgets and the individual members because we wanted to see where. So we should have that. I think we're only asking for expenditure data once a year, though.
Okay. Are you able to provide us with an analysis of that? And I ask that because we're going to have to start looking at Perkins and where we want to prioritize the funding for Perkins. And I think it would really be helpful to see what kinds of activities that the current state grants are funding.
We can take a look at the budgets that have been submitted as part of the work plans, as part of the proposal, and then we can check it on the way out to make sure that the spending's there.
Do you think we might? Okay.
Let me pull it together and talk to my team and see.
Okay.
We have all of our data's in NOVA, and so we use a product called Looker. It's a way to visualize the data. So we have some pretty sophisticated.
Yeah. So Michelle, are we able to do it for CTEIG?
We would have to, because ours is on
We'll work
paper.
with them. Yeah, we'll work with them and see. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
It could be an import that we do. We'll work with it, though, to try to get it more automated.
Yeah.
This is always the push-pull, right? It's how do we get you information quicker?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Right before Member Salazar, just a follow-up that Vice Chair Sun mentioned. So if 84% are an overlap, would that potentially increase if we had one application with these two purposes?
That's a really good question. I think there's a lot of variables. You know, how many applicants do you have? The funding staying static, right, as we know with the budget being signed. So that variable hasn't shifted. We're not seeing a big shift in the regional allocations going out. Did I miss the mark?
Chair Grande, if I may add.
Yes, please.
Member Ting, you actually hit on a very important point regarding looking at Perkins funding and K-12 strong workforce funding. One of the challenges that we're working through and figuring out is helping the districts understand better how to braid funding and providing very clear, providing some guidelines about how to do that. And in these kinds of partnership and collaboration and the funding streams, I think sometimes it becomes more challenging for the districts to understand when to use what. And so that's something that we're going to have to work through and talk through that provide more perhaps clarity or guidelines. But it's something that we really should be focusing on, because there's right now I think there's a lot of, in terms of talking about overlap, I think there's some potential confusion about that, and looking at how to most effectively use those funds to achieve the outcomes for the district level. So thank you for asking that question.
I appreciate our Vice Chancellor of Workforce and Economic Development from the Chancellor's Office, Sheni Weber, for adding to this conversation. Patricia DeCoste?
I was just going to also chime in a little bit on this. And this, I think you hit a very important, asked a very important question there, Member Sun, because the 84% is, there's an overlap of the two different applications, also sort of reinforces why it's important to stagger the application processes, so that, and to sort of build on that, the conversation that was presented just a little earlier in terms of the communications around these two different programs. What are their purposes? How can they be used? If you want to do this, you might want to be applying for this program. If you want to be doing this, you might be applying for this program. And so I think that we really will need to emphasize all of that during that phase of the application process, or preceding that, really. I think Michelle McIntosh mentioned that earlier as well.
Thank you so much, Deputy Executive Director from our State Board of Education. We are getting everyone in on this conversation, and it's adding so much more to what would have easily been just looking at it and going, well, there's data for us, but actually querying, where can the data take us next, and how will we be able to braid all of these funding sources so that we at least can report back to the legislature, we are adequately funded, we are not adequately funded, we have additional funds that we could allocate should they ever be apportioned to us. Member Salazar.
Dr. Roberts, this may be out of scope, so I just want to acknowledge that, but I'm curious to know, particularly around the community college strong workforce dollars and the regional allocations, has there been any analysis around how those investments have been made and how they've aligned to the K-12 strong workforce awardees?
Absolutely, especially in the regional levels, because the regions are helping to convene the K-12 for the K-12 strong workforce. So, yeah, there's been a lot of discussion sort of between them, and the ramp up in the first year was tough for us to sort of get out straight away to our colleges, although we did work with our colleges a lot to help onboard some of the key talent and to sort of get that message out there. So I think this year we're really reminding folks that SWP, Strong Workforce Program, can always be used as a match. We gave them very specific parameters in terms of spending allowances on sort of how to do that. So we tried to drill down to make them feel more comfortable in crossing over. Because I think if the ask in terms of the policy is to have us work together, then how do we sort of create, opportunities for that to happen? So.
And I think I was just curious to know how the investments have or have not aligned.
I think that we will continue to look at the investments this year. You'll probably see more of an increase going into next year just because of the ramp up. But we can look at that. We are looking at it. In the regions, I meet with them weekly the regional chairs, and we talk probably an hour and a half about K-12 strong workforce. So it's about aligning the resources, and that's why we really want to shine a light and incentivize in the applications collaboration, not just consortium, collaboration. And so what does that mean, and how do we measure it? So one of the things I'm asking the regions is, what are better ways that we can measure the collaboration? Because again, those are the questions that we're getting from the legislature as well.
Vice Chair Sun.
I just wanted to make a comment before we leave this particular item. I always feel like we're a little bit behind on things, and I appreciate the timeline because it sounds like we're really trying to work to get ahead of the game, and looking at the 2021 fiscal year funding and application process is a great start to that. So I want to maximize the most of the time that this committee meets from time to time. So given we don't meet again until September, and the applications are going out, November, right? Or is that right?
September and November.
Yeah, September and November. It would really be helpful to gather the data and so some of the conversations that we've been having, and then have us take a look at that. I think it also will inform the Perkins plan development as well. And then if you could also bring to us kind of a comparison of current application, new application, and what kinds of tweaks have been made in both the CTEIG as well as a strong workforce to demonstrate what you all have been telling us is that you're working on alignment, you're working on alignment, you're working on alignment. So what does that look like now in the second iteration of CTEIG under this new funding area, and then the second iteration under strong workforce? I think some real specific things so that we can look at would be really helpful and help us get a better picture.
Thanks for the questions.
Are there additional questions or comments on this agenda item?
So, Chair Grande, prior to moving on from this agenda item, though, we want to take the opportunity and go back to our metrics and review our metrics one more time.
Very good.
So,
we brought the matrix back out, right?
Right.
Okay.
So we're going back to the matrix of metrics, and so now you have kind of the first points of data for CTEIG. So now you can have some time to look at that, review that, and then take a look at the metrics as well. But also wanted to go back through these metrics as this is what you approved in December. And at this point, just really want to make the point that while we only have metrics for one program, because K-12 Strong Workforce is just getting started, it's just getting started, at least you have some opportunity to see what has been collected, what could be collected, and then maybe keep that at top of mind. I don't see the metrics really changing at this point, but what may change is the source of data as we continue to research the data that is available to us through our agencies and how to best get that data from the field. So I just want to make that point clear as we move forward. Okay, so in reviewing our metrics, I'm going to just kind of walk you through again. If you look at column A and it's row 2, for the CTEIG, we're looking at the high school cohort graduation rate. And I believe that cohort was removed, so it's just the high school graduation rate, right? And then the same metric following over would be for the K-12 Strong Workforce. That would be column F, and that would be row 2. Again, the number of pupils completing high school. So we have a rate, and we have the number of pupils. The second metric is actually in row 3. So column A, for CTEIG, we're looking at the number of pupils completing CTE coursework. And then in column F, row 3, again, the number of pupils completing CTE coursework. Our third metric if you turn the page, on page 2 is, again, column A, row 4, for the CT incentive grant. It is the number of pupils meeting academic and career readiness standards as defined in the CCI associated with the California School Dashboard. And that is, I believe, related to that 84% that you saw on the metrics there. And then on the K-12 strong workforce side, there's not an equivalent metric to that because that is specific to the K-12 school system. Again, column A, row 5, this is our 4th metric, the number of pupils obtaining an industry-recognized credential, certificate, license, or other measure of skill attainment. This is the same in column F for the K-12 strong workforce, exact same, number of pupils obtaining an industry-recognized credential, certificate, license, or other measure of technical attainment. We go then to item 5, which is row 6. So that's column A. We're looking at the number of former pupils employed and the types of businesses in which they're employed. Again, the same in column F and row 6 for the K-12 strong workforce. And then on the final page, our 6th metric, column A, it has to be, it's for CTEIG, it's the number of former pupils enrolled in a post-secondary educational institution. For the K-12 strong workforce, it's the number of former pupils enrolled in a post-secondary educational institution disaggregated by public, private, nonprofit, and private for-profit institutions. And then metric 7 is the number of former pupils enrolled in a state apprenticeship program, and that's column A, row 8. Again, with column F, row 8, the number of former pupils in a state apprenticeship program, same measurement, same metric. And then lastly, the last metric, which is the number of former pupils enrolled in a form of job training other than a state apprenticeship program, and the same with the K-12 strong workforce, which is column F, row 9, number of former pupils, another form of job training.
Where are we with the MOU, data sharing MOU?
So,
Yeah,
no,
you know, work on.
Yeah, we've been working on it. There's a larger MOU that's been in production between CDE and the community colleges. So we've tried not to, mess with that and let that process go through. We don't necessarily think that we need an MOU on some of these items. It's more just what's the data file, what's the date that we're going to receive it, and then sort of bring it up through the system. And we've talked to your data folks about that as well. Next step is we have a meeting on Monday, as a matter of fact, to really narrow down the data definitions, which I think when you look at the far right-hand column of this matrix, that's really where sort of the bulk of the work and development is. So we're getting there. We don't think we need to complicate it with an MOU, though. That's where we kind of landed.
Okay. Then in the broader CDE community college MOU conversation, is any of this information kind of at least fed up to the folks who are working on that so that they're aware?
It absolutely is. Yeah, we're when I make those comments, it's having consulted with that team that's currently negotiating it. It's our legal staff. It's all of those folks. So we want to do the most effective way to sort of do the data share. And the feeling is that it doesn't necessarily need to be in the MOU. So we'll keep going down that road. Reducing administrative, right?
I like that. I really like that objective.
It's our first one.
Member Salazar.
I mean, I definitely would not want to impede progress and appreciate that there's that conversation happening as it relates to data. But how do we ensure that it's institutionalized and that, it's there for posterity reasons? And it maybe not necessarily MOU, but maybe just a memorialization of how the information is being shared?
A lot of times we do crosswalks and we rely on our data definition dictionaries to sort of have that. We can formalize it in some way. Because I think the call out in the legislation is you have to have an agreed upon date of a switch of a transfer of data. So we can memorialize that. Yeah. Thank you.
Are there additional questions or comments regarding the matrix of metrics?
Thanks for your continued comments on it.
Well, then, before we leave this agenda item, are there any members of the public that would like to make comments on the matrix of metrics or our CTEIG or strong workforce report? If you'd like to come up, state your name, and hopefully we can answer those questions, or we'll bring Michelle and Matt back to answer the questions.
Yeah, actually, Matt, don't sit down yet. Maureen White, Workforce Division, California Community Colleges. So actually, this question came up about 45 minutes ago, and then you just mentioned the MOU with under the apprenticeship on the matrix of metrics. And so my question is really, could you clarify or comment on the 1% of apprenticeships where those metrics are? Where are the students now?
Thank you for the question.
I'll tell you that when we wrote the matrix, we're looking at a data share of that database and the apprenticeship data. That's what we were after. So we don't necessarily have that data identified in any analysis done with our data yet. But again, that's a separate sort of MOU question. And there's some questions as to whether that data will provide us with what we need to. So we're going through the process on it, on that one in particular. Appreciate the question.
An additional question?
Good morning. Cheryl Ryder, Executive Director for Career Development with the Placer County Office of Education. I also chair the Placer County CTE Consortium. I served on the KROP Executive Board for 8 years, the CACT leadership for 9 years, the CTE Committee for 10 years. So I've been mired in this work for a very long time. And I first want to thank Michelle and Matt for their collaboration. The work that they've done together at the state level is imperative, and we appreciate the updated timeline so that the budgets are done before we have to submit our budgets, typically January, February, so that's extremely helpful. I also want to acknowledge the CTE Incentive Grant technical assistance providers that have been a cornerstone of this work for the past 3 years. They have had a great working relationship with folks in the field, providing information and support that is really important that it continues. And they met regularly throughout these last 3 years, putting together information to provide accurate and consistent updates to the field. They had a frequently asked questions page that they collaborate on to make sure that the information is consistent when questions arise. So that type of work is really helpful for the field. And I encourage the Chancellor's Office to somehow work with these technical assistance providers, perhaps some kind of a contract, or bring them in for this work to continue, because the TAPs have good working relationships with those of us who provide CTE in the field. I'd like to turn to some of the challenges that we have had in the Strong Workforce Program and the applications. Throughout the application process, there was inconsistent information from region to region. Some took it on boldly as a regional approach, and others kind of stood back and said, well, this is a state program. So the information was inconsistent and unreliable throughout the application process, and there was inadequate resolution for resolving differences of scores in applications depending on what region and what selection committee people were served on. There was some coercion reported by applicants who were told that they had to give some of the grant funding to their community colleges in order to be awarded. So we were very concerned about that. And members of the field and the organizations that I mentioned before and others put together some anecdotal information and shared with the Assembly, which I think you know that there was strong bipartisan support for AB 1303 to move these dollars back under the CDE oversight. And I would encourage you to take a look at the root causes of AB 1303 and the talking points that were shared to see if we can resolve some of these challenges for the next go-round. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Matt or Michelle, is there anything that you could add to the commentary? None at this time. Thank you very much. Vice Chair Sun? No? Well, in that case, are we ready to move off of our first agenda item? Member Rucker?
Well, I want to thank both of the folks who came to make comments today, particularly on this item. And I do appreciate the comment from the field about what happened with this last application process. While it's disheartening at times to hear that there were some difficulties, and especially the type of difficulties that you enumerated, it's important for us to know that these things occurred, not because we want to have this moment of gotcha, but because it's an opportunity not only for us to learn from that process, particularly about the differences in support, the regional approaches to how to handle or provide support to the LEAs that were considering the application, but also to understand what the impact or sustained effect of those regional differences actually turned out to be. I think in particular, as we see with the type of collaboration that's really and truly unprecedented in the presentation we saw today from Michelle and from Matt, that there is clearly a marked change in what the approach will be, that I think that they were prescient today in making the decision to make the presentation and to focus on the collaboration in the way they chose to today. I hope that some of what you saw modeled today in their collaboration will answer or address some of the concerns that you raised. And I think that the fact that you came here and raised those concerns helped us to feel better, to know that there was a great commitment, both from the community college office and the CDE, to make this process work in a way that will address some of your concerns. So I appreciate that you came today, you asked your questions, and you raised the issues that occurred. And I would just ask both Matt and Michelle to follow up with you to find out exactly what it is or what would be required to make sure the same kind of mistakes were not made. I'm the type of person who believes that the mistakes were not purposeful or with some intent of creating more problems, that probably these folks were attempting to do some problem solving that were based on some regional concerns or priorities, and that, as Deming once said, for every complex circumstance, there are simple solutions that are simply wrong, and this may have been one of those. This may have been some of those circumstances. So I err on the side of caution that these were not purposeful or intentional abuses of process or abuse of power. There was an intent to create some openness that actually did not occur. And I believe that'll be resolved by the things you heard from the leadership from these two individuals today. I believe those will be resolved going forward.
Member Rucker, Vice Chair Sun.
Thank you, Member Rucker. You say a lot of the things that I was thinking, but I think this goes back and harkens back on the information that I asked for, the specific data, because we speak of administrative burdens. We have created an administrative burden by splitting the funds. So without really understanding how those funds work together or enhance what's been happening, it is a bit difficult, and we need to have that information, as I said, before we look at an additional new source of funding under Perkins 5. So, we have had significant investment in the state in career technical education programs for 7 to 8 years now. And we had some preliminary information about what it started, but most of the research says we got something going here, but it takes additional strategy and additional funding to take it to another level. So I just want to know, under this format of splitting the money, if it is enhancing, it is causing more cohesion or collaboration between K-12 and community colleges. We need to know that information to see if what we've structured here is really actually working, because it is an additional administrative burden to the sites.
Other comments on this agenda item? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 2 on our agenda, which is an update on the development of the California State Career Technical Education Plan, including the requirements for the Federal Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act, which of course we're referring to as Perkins 5. So I will welcome back Michelle McIntosh from the California Department of Education to share with our committee the progress on the development of the 2019-2020 California State Transition Plan for Career Technical Education.
All right. Good morning again. So So thank you for giving us the opportunity to give you the update on our plan and where we're going. So just let you know, the transition plan was submitted in May, and it was received by the feds. And I believe, and I'm going to double check, it was accepted. It was approved. So the transition plan was approved by the federal government. So also knowing we had this ambitious timeline with key benchmarks to achieve by 2023 in order to submit the state plan by April 30th of 2020. I know last time there was a little bit of discussion about that and what some of that plan would look like and how that would work, and because it was quite ambitious. And so what I'd like to share with you is the fact that we actually had Lisa Reimers in our department work specifically with the West Ed folks, and they spent a lot of time and went through and created a project management plan. So they gave us a project management plan that created some definite benchmarks and some milestones. But not only with that project management plan, we also worked on creating a CTE project tracker. And so we have that in place. And Jeff and I, Jeff from the Chancellor's office and I sat down and individually, or together I should say, went through that tracker plan with our teams to kind of chunk out the work and make sure that we were able to assign lead responsibilities and priorities on how we're moving through with the state plan. Because it is such an ambitious timeline, this has been really helpful to help us stay on track with what we need to do in order to meet in order to meet not only the Perkins requirements, that's the main requirement for the state plan, but in also overall meeting the overall goals of the state plan. So at this point, the membership of the stakeholder group has been identified. We have a letter that's ready to soon go out to those folks, inviting them to our first stakeholder meeting. And our first stakeholder meeting, where we're going at this point, will be held virtually in early August. We're doing a virtual meeting first to onboard all of the members, and then the following week, August 13th, we will actually hold the first in-person stakeholder meeting for folks to go through and discuss the Perkins pieces and the parts of the plan. And so that's where we are currently. Any questions?
So looking at this, it says complete draft plan A for January State Board meeting October 25th. Will there be an opportunity for us to look at a draft of the draft prior to that? Yeah.
Come on up. Was a draft of the draft in the works in the plan?
I think at this point, the goal is to present it to you guys. We have all of our advisory committee meetings built into the agenda as well, the timeline. I hesitate to make a commitment because things are, still, the dust is still settling with a lot of our changes that we've had in the building, both at the Chancellor's office and at CDE as well. So as that dust settles, I think we'll have a clearer idea in the next week or two. But yes, I do think the goal is to have a draft to you. Like I said, I don't know if that is going to happen at this time. We will know more as kind of, like I said, dust settles.
Would there be a likelihood of maybe seeing the draft of the draft at the September 13th meeting?
We hope to have some pieces done to share with you. Will it be complete? Most likely not, especially since we have all those stakeholder meetings on. But as Michelle said, we have a tracker where we've outlined everything that the feds require, and we have people beginning to write on some of the sections that aren't as intense for feedback, because there are some sections in that we have to submit that doesn't need as much stakeholder feedback because it's more processes and how we approach something. So we can tackle those chunks. A lot of the chunks that are the meat of the plan, we have to wait until we meet our stakeholders, and they're going to help guide us on the direction we're going to go.
And do we have any sort of an inclination when that September stakeholder meeting is going to be?
We are shooting, I believe, around the week of the 20th.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
I'm still looking for locations. We are also, for the virtual meeting, we're shooting we're trying to get it for August 8th, but it's going to be right around that time. And then the 13th is set. We have that scheduled. We have a location. I'm looking for September. So those should all be finalized this week before the letter goes out to stakeholders.
I noticed that our August in-person meeting is here in the north, and I had queried previously, but you weren't on the call, so I'll query again. Is there any potential that that second stakeholder meeting could be in the south?
We discussed that in our internal team. I'm not very sure, because to lift all of the personnel that we have here from all the agencies, the facilitation with West Ed, it is kind of a heavy lift.
Okay.
What I can guarantee is we have public meetings in the South at our major CTE conferences in Rancho Mirage. We also have them up here. So we are doing across the state for the open public piece. This stakeholder group is we have about 78 people on it. So it's a more intensive work group.
Very good. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Vice Chair Sun.
It seems like for us to take a look at a draft of the draft, September is a little too early, but November is a little too late. So should we have a meeting in October, even brief, to look at what, because you will have done quite a bit of stakeholder feedback at that time.
Yeah, I think that would be the will of the committee.
So I'll put that under discussion. We'll come back to it at the end of today's meeting about an October meeting.
Yeah, Grande, I would say that the U.S. Department of Education has given us a template of how the plan should be laid out. It's pretty discrete, and quite a number of those discrete items have already been filled in in the transition plan. So it's a matter of expanding those items. There are a few items that we have to address that weren't addressed in the transition plan, like the vision of the state with regard to CT. How are you doing in terms of letting the public know through the stakeholder meetings, public comments? So that's upcoming, and so we'd have to fill that in. And the third piece is the accountability piece, that we have to have a discussion separately on that in both between us and the Chancellor office to try and figure that the indicators. So there are pieces there. So I can say that we will try to get something to you. At least that October seems reasonable, but definitely by November we have to get it. I wouldn't even call it a draft of a draft. I would call it a draft plan in some sense.
Well, thank you so much, Director.
So it sounds like in September we can at the very least see some of the more template, standardized type of items, and then we can at least have a sense of where the holes are that we need to fill in. And then, does that mean that we should meet in October? Based on, yeah, I think that we might want to look at that. Okay.
I have it further down on our agenda under discussion items. Any other comments or question on Member Rucker?
As I look at the handouts you've prepared for us on the summary of previous joint pathways, committee discussions and actions, I think there's something notable missing from this list, and that would be there was a great deal of labor and time and many sessions devoted to the development of the content of the transition plan, the Perkins transition plan. So I think that the recommendation that was made by this body concerning the transition plan needs to be added to this list of actions, particularly since the good doctor already noted that a lot of the content for the development of the draft is informed by that transition plan, so that the public does not think that that information came from no place. It is very important for the approval of that transition plan to be included in this list of actions. So I would ask you going forward to make sure that that is noted. The second thing I'm going to suggest is for our September meeting, because one of the things that happened as part of the work we did on the day we did approve the transition plan, CDE staff, particularly Russ Weigel, did an excellent job of tutoring us on what was actually contained in the transition plan and why, and what was going to be developed in the state plan going forward by the stakeholder group. It might be a good idea to plan for as part of the September meeting what the activities of the stakeholder group are on building out the sections of the transition plan that were not, that of the state plan that did not need to be addressed in the transition plan. So that gives us a better understanding of where the work of this stakeholder group is going. And then the last thing I would request, or the last thing I'm going to suggest, is as it relates to the transition plan and the state plan, when you do present the draft to us, to make sure that there's a clear explanation of how what was approved in the transition plan informed what was developed further in the state plan. Again, that's more for public transparency, because when I heard you, Lisa, say the writing has already begun, it was really important to say the writing has already begun based on what has already been crafted by and approved in the state transition plan. Otherwise, people feel that there is work going on that the public is not involved with. And it's important to remember the reason why that's important is because there was no period of time for the public to comment on the transition plan. So even though we were transparent with the work we were doing, we had a lot of time and we put a lot of study and discussion into the development of the elements of the transition plan, there was no opportunity for stakeholders to give input on that transition plan. So it's very important for people to understand where a lot of the content of the draft is coming from and what it's being informed by, so that people know that there was very public deliberation at these meetings over several meetings that occurred, so that people are aware this is not something that came out of a vacuum or that came in from a meeting in a small room, that there was a very public development and discussion about the content, and there was some intentionality from all the people who were here at this dais, as well as from the stakeholders who did attend those meetings and offer their input and concerns about what we were considering.
Thank you so much for bringing that as an item for our consideration and inclusion, because I think it's very important that everyone understand that this did not happen in a vacuum or in a small room or on a cocktail napkin.
Did I say cocktail?
No, I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
So, yeah, thank you. So I know we're requesting a lot of things for September. I think it would also be helpful to get a sense of how the current Perkins funding works, and how it's been split between CDE and community colleges, what it's being kind of used for, and all that, just so that we have a little bit of context, because I don't know the weeds of some of this stuff, and it would be helpful, because I think we're going to need to have conversations, and we'll have to get into the weeds at some point. And I'm afraid that if we don't have that, when we get to a point in the end when we're really rushed, that we might end up defaulting to what's been done already, and that's something I don't want us to fall into.
That's a very good point to reiterate, is although the timeline is quite ambitious, we don't want to say, well, we had to get this together, so we just defaulted. So, all right. Any other items? Where are we going next, Michelle?
So where we're going next. So we have our first virtual meeting. That virtual meeting, as I said, will set the stage for basically giving the role, also giving a level setting for all the members that are joining. Some are familiar with Perkins and our state plan, some are not. We want to make sure that everybody comes to the table with a good understanding. We also want to make sure that we're able to get some reading materials and things out to them ahead of time, looking at our principles of how we want to do this work and so forth, and then moving forward from there. So that's where we're going next. So we're taking it one chunk at a time. Thank you, Member Rucker. Thank you, Member Sun. I've made notes of your requests for the next meeting, so we'll make sure that we have those ready to go and available for you. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. I think it's important also for you all, the Joint Advisory Committee, as was mentioned at our May 29th meeting, that as we proceed in this process for developing a state CTE plan, that we are going to be sort of toggling. So it's sort of an intentional toggle between what we're doing and drawing from one of our guiding principles to lead with our state work, you know, the California way, right? And so it's as we develop this state plan, it's going to be nestled in our state vision, our state processes, our state programs, right? We just spent the morning talking about both CTEIG and strong workforce programs, but there are other programs that the state is operating, both on the K-12 side as well as on the community college side. So we want to ensure that we're leading with that work, we're providing that vision, and we're going to very strategically look at the prompts that are required by the federal Perkins law to see where those fit in, and then insert those sort of strategically or surgically in that. So the Perkins piece is going to be a sub-piece, if you will, of this broader, larger piece. So I wanted us to keep that in mind, as you know, we're going to have to be intentional about us thinking about that as we toggle between our state broader piece and what is required by Perkins. And they're very specific prompts, but that doesn't give the overarching, and we want to lead with that, right?
That's an important point. Thank you for reiterating it to us, because it is our state plan with the Perkins requirements included, but it is not a Perkins plan with our state requirements included. Mm-hmm. Any other comments on this agenda item? Any comments from the public on this agenda item? Really? Yeah. Are there any other items for Michelle, or can we say thank you, Michelle, so much for presenting the information on agenda item 2 for us? And then because there could potentially be a motion to adjourn, I won't do that yet, but there are members of the public that are here, and I will see if there's any members that would like to address our Workforce Pathways Joint Advisory Committee on any items that weren't already covered on the agenda. Any comments? Oh, please. Will you start by identifying yourself for us, sir?
My name is Jack Mitchell. I work at the California Department of Education. I'm the secondary visual performing arts consultant and also the industry sector lead for arts, media, and entertainment. And I wanted to be sure that when we look at the stakeholder group, the folks who are providing input on the state plan, that we not only look at the various levels of education who are affected by the state plan from elementary up through post-secondary, but also that we look at the breadth of the industry sectors who are affected by the state plan, so that we don't end up with a set of stakeholders that represent largely the traditional career tech ed areas, the 6 areas, as opposed to the 15 industry sectors that we currently have in the state. So I think it's important to be sure that when we're looking at those stakeholders, that we're including folks from all of the 15 industry sectors who are going to be affected by the state plan and the workings of the implementation of the state plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mitchell. Any other public commentary? Very well. Any other committee member thoughts that you want to share with us before I ask for our discussion and next steps? Anyone thinking about lunch? Because guess what? Lisa says lunch is here and there's plenty of sandwiches and salads for everyone. But you can't have lunch yet because we need to discuss that concept of having an October meeting. It was brought up. And let me just remind everyone, we already have Friday, September 13th on our calendar for our meeting from 9 to 2, right back here. And we also have a November 8th, again, another Friday from 9 to 2 as future meetings. But now is a good time for us to discuss whether or not there is a need for an October meeting. Member Rawlings?
I would be in favor of an October meeting, particularly if we're looking at taking a look at the schedule of dates that we have here. Maybe that first half of October. I'm actually interested in attending the CCC Association for Occupational Education meeting that's there. Although I'm not sure if it would be helpful for us to be able to have that draft plan and review it prior to that or after that, as far as being informed while we're there at that event. But I think right in that early middle part of October would be my preference.
Okay, so with that information, let's imagine that we have a lot of input from the community college side on that CCC AOE conference. It would be better to have it after rather than before, which would lead us back, if we're considering those concepts of Fridays being very well, it would lead us to either the 25th or the 1st, the 25th of October or the 1st, but that would come right before the 8th, so you don't want that form of an overlap. But that's during the CCC AOE conference, because CCC AOE is the 16th through the 18th. Yeah. So that doesn't give us a lot of time.
Would it be necessary for it to be an in-person meeting? Can it be a telecom?
I think that's always an opportunity, as long as we can arrange for the remote sites.
Mm-hmm. Ideally, I think the 8th. I think ideally the 18th. I know that it's during the conference, but or maybe the 21st, or maybe we do 21st, 22nd, the week, early part of the week after.
I'm wondering how much information we're going to glean from CCC AOE that won't be making it into the draft because it's immediately after.
Yeah. I think there will be other opportunities for it. I'm looking at just process-wise that we get the next iteration but in October as a committee.
So, I think that as staff, we had talked about some of these conferences that are coming up in the fall. There are many of them, right? And we see that as an opportunity to gather information from them. And there will be, as the sort of the timeline for the development of the California State CTE state plan, there are very specific input sessions. So, I mean, it doesn't preclude folks from those organizations to also provide input once a draft is written, or we have something more concrete for folks to respond to. So, in light of that, I might just suggest Friday, October 11th. I don't know why. I just kind of threw out a Friday. It's kind of right smack in between the September and the November meeting. It might give us unless there are some conflicts in your schedules.
I think throwing out that similar Friday date earlier in the month of October is a good option. I can't speak for the members who are not with us today, but for those who are around the dais right now, does Friday, October 11th look open? Okay.
Works for me.
Okay.
I might have a conflict. I have to look.
Okay. Kristen? Okay. Alma? Okay. Without knowing Member Acosta or Ortiz Lincoln, it looks like the majority of us would be able to meet.
Yeah.
So shall we save that date, Friday, October 11th, for another 9 to 2 meeting? And then if it needs to change, we can have that discussion at the September 13th meeting. But at least we can get it on the calendar, possibly get the room, maybe get the remote locations lined up. But if everyone would like to put that on their calendar now, I'd appreciate it. Just hold the date, and we'll see how well we can get with all of the members and their schedules. Lisa?
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention, for having the remote locations, we will need at least one member here at the CDE for the broadcast. So just keep that in mind. Or we can have all of you, you know. It's a good family.
It is. It is. Oh, very good. All right. So let me go ahead and reiterate our posted meeting dates, which are still tentative, and they may be updated depending on the agenda and the availability of a quorum. But we do have Friday, September 13th from 9 to 2. We are holding Friday, October 11th from 9 to 2. We also have Friday, November 8th from 9 to 2. And then, of course, we do hope to propose dates for the 2020 year at our September meeting. So with that being said, I will thank, oh, yes, please.
I say one more thing to go along with what Vice Chair Son said. I think we should use the October meeting as your input into the plan, because we have opportunity, as Patricia talked about later on, and also the law requires us to put the state plan on for public input on electronically, so that anyone can comment on that. So I think that meeting would be for you to have your comments into the plan, and then we have the November meeting for continue that to refine that, and then have the public input before it goes on to the state board and to the governor's office.
Thank you very much. So would we earmark that October 11th meeting for the single agenda item of the reading of and commentary on the state plan draft? Yeah, it's in most agreement? Okay, very well. Anything else to come before us before we adjourn today? All right, then I'd like to thank everyone for attending. It has been an incredibly productive meeting. I cannot thank Matt and Michelle enough for the update, especially for the matrix of metrics as well as the initial data responses. I'd like to invite everyone to join us for sandwiches and salads. We do have more than enough, and lunch is here. And then I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Therefore, I will call this meeting adjourned at 11:45 a.m. and thank you everyone for joining us today.